All right. Just a couple little things. In case it doesn't get announced in Big Church, we're not having Praise Jam this Monday because, the youth are heading off to camp, and we have some of our college students helping with that. And that's a bunch of those are big participants in Praise Jam, so we're just going to cancel for this Monday. Also, I think you've noticed summer's getting here. It's amazing this summer we've had rain almost every other day. That's probably coming to a close here pretty soon. I heard the heat index is going to be 105 Monday, so that's not too great. Hot day for the youth to leave, all right? And one last little thing, since I won't be able to say this in Sunday's beginning church, although I may be able to, I just really want to say thank you and have appreciation for Zadams, as we call him, Zach Adams, because I don't know if you know this, enjoy him leading this morning. It's his last time to lead in a Sunday morning because he's going to be doing marriage counseling every Sunday up until marriage, I understand, something like that. And then he's probably going to be residing closer to San Antonio because Miss Rachel's taking him away from us. And they're at a great church, believers, and I'm sure they're going to be a huge addition there. So anyway, hopefully they're going to come back this way, though, after a few years. Is that right? All right, we're hoping. Okay, so with that, we just thought we were through with Luther. I got to looking at, realized I skipped too many things. And so I'm going to very quickly run through those things that I did not cover on Luther, and then we're going to get started on Ulrich Zwingli today. All right, we went over the major, I guess you could say, important differences that result from the rise of Lutheranism and indeed Protestantism. Let me run through a few more things here. One reason for Luther's success, the major reason is I think the Lord was behind the reforms he was initiating. But you also have the fact that the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, Charles V, had to turn away from trying to put down the beginning movement of Lutheranism and Protestantism because of the threat of the Ottoman Turks, who are once again on the offensive in southeastern Europe. And so that's one thing that helps him. We already know about the printing press and of course his mastery of the German language. Once that Bible was put in print in a vernacular language, a language that the ordinary people could read, I think the Protestant Reformation was unstoppable. You just put your Bible here and look at the practice of the Catholic Church at that time, and you see obviously there's things that just do not compute. It's not adding up here. And so that is an important thing. In 1555, the Protestant princes, they'd already protested Diet Aspire. That's where we get the terminology Protestant. We were protesters. And at the Peace of Augsburg, they basically decide on a truce. He's focusing on fighting the Turks. He needs these Protestant princes to back him in fighting the Turks. So he has to stop trying to repress, their religious beliefs, and he needs their political support, their military support to fight the Turks. And so as a result, they're going to have the Peace of Augsburg. And basically the settlement was the German province, or whatever governmental unit it was, Holy Roman Empire was a crazy quilt work of all kinds of political units. Whatever the prince was, that's what the people will be. Now, in actual practice, this did not always work out that way. Obviously, if an area becomes overwhelmingly Protestant and the prince is a Roman Catholic, he may look out the palace window one day and say, I see the light, I'm a Protestant, okay? And sometimes the other way as well, if it's majority Catholic and he's a Protestant prince. But generally speaking, though, where the prince was, that's going to be what that area is going to be, and that was the compromise. The other reasons, which I've already mentioned, printing press, is use of language. The translations of the Bible democratize religion and Christianity. Remember, prior to this, the Bible was a closed book. It's only in Latin. Most people can't read Latin. Only the clergy could read it. Now, anyone can go and read it in their own language. And he, of course, had enlightened views of sex and marriage. You see, in Lutheran pastors can marry. And you got to remember that this has always been a real touchy point within the Roman Catholic Church. Their views of celibacy, I would argue, is probably, and this is gross generalization, which I should never do, but I really do believe much of their views on celibacy goes back to Greek Stoicism. It's not even, a biblical justification. Another reason some suspect is that, priests, by not being allowed to marry, the church can control, they don't have property, right? The priests don't. It all belongs to the Catholic Church. There's all sorts of justifications for celibacy within Catholicism. The problem with it is very few of them are biblical. And you got to remember, there's another branch of Catholicism which claims to be older than Roman Catholicism. I think that argument's kind of bogus. We're talking about who? Greek Orthodoxy, right? Can their priests marry? Yes. Why, yes, they can. All right, so if no major branch of Catholicism says that marriage is okay, why Roman Catholicism is going to really, bear down upon celibacy. And actually celibacy within the Roman Catholic Church was controversial up till this point. We're going to, as we get to Zwingli, one of Zwingli's major supporters was the son of a priest who was not technically married. He had a concubine, thank you. A concubine, which back then was perfectly legal and was not looked down upon. And, you are having a laugh there. You just brought back to be a freshman paper in which you talk about Solomon and his many wives, and he had so many porcupines. All right. Instead concubines. But anyway, so here we go. So you got Luther, of course, and by the way, some were teaching that even if you're married, you should have sex only for procreation, period. And Luther thought that was a really dumb idea. He thought that this was God's gift to humanity. It was a beautiful, wonderful gift. It should be enjoyed within the bounds of marriage, of course. And that was, believe it or not, in some people's view, a radical idea. And of course, many agree with Luther. All right. So now some of the after effects of the teachings of Luther, especially his teachings, there's neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, all are one in Christ Jesus. The peasants are going to take that and run with it politically. I mean, they are going to rise up and use that as a justification to overthrow, in some cases, murder the nobility. And you have these peasant rebellions sweeping across Europe. And Luther, at first, was somewhat in sympathy. He wrote a tract when these peasant rebellions first began, and what a tract it was is on admonition to peace. And in that tract, he blasts the nobility. He says, "We have no one on earth to thank for this mischievous rebellion except you lords and princes." And then skipping forward, "You do nothing but flay and rob your subjects in order that you may live a life of splendor and pride until the poor common folk can no longer stand it." All right. So that's what he starts off. But then the peasant rebellions go really crazy. They murder, rape, just pillaging, burning, destroying. You got to remember the peasants aren't educated. And so while they may have started out with justifications on religious grounds, they just go berserk. And Luther really believed in order, and he reverses himself and then calls upon, the very lords that he had earlier criticized. And then he saw this also as destroying the Reformation, because all this chaos that was going on. And so he's going to turn around and he's going to argue that nothing justified the use of armed force against authority. And then later on, this idea is going to really be enforced by the Lutheran Church, because you got to remember, one of the big mistakes I say of all three of the big three reformers, really four, is that they initiate the Reformation, but they just could not get away from the idea of government authority. They did not believe in separation of church and state. And whenever you have the church being run by the state, look out for corruption. Look out for people with wrong motivations. And, I submit to you, government bureaucrats are not the best at theology. They just aren't, never are, never will be. And the state always winds up resorting to using force, right? And so that's one of the big downfalls of Lutheranism, and there's a problem. Calvin's going to have problems with that as well, and we're going to see Zwingli is going to get himself killed, literally, as a result of that. So you have the later church after Luther dies, since the pastors are paid by state revenue, they become uber supportive of state authority, and then they turn around and use the state authority to make sure that no other, Protestant theology can operate legally, Or as they go after the Anabaptists almost as harshly as the Catholics do, and they also were against the Calvinists. They were against any competitors. State monopolies of religion become fiercely protective of their particular, way of doing things. And that's going to be a problem later on down the road. Of course, some accuse the attitude of the Germans in World War II as being a result of Lutheranism. I think that is a bit of a stretch, but what they're talking about is, many of the Nazi war criminals, when they're put on trial, they would ask, well, why did you do this? And they would say, well, I'm innocent because I was simply following orders. And they would say this goes back to Luther. I really think that's stretching it a bit, but it is true. Luther would later come out and say you should obey government authorities. Now, in 1525, Luther is going to marry. Now, the story behind this is somewhat humorous. You have this group of nuns who are influenced by Luther's teachings, about marriage, and they decide to run away from their convent. And the story's told that they concealed themselves in empty barrels that had previously been packed with salted herring. and they're smuggled out of the convent in this wagon, and they come to Wittenberg, and then these nuns show up and say, hey, we left the convent, can you help us out here? And of course, Luther was always up to a challenge. He decides that he personally will go about and try to find a husband for each of these nuns, and he does, except one. Actually, he found a husband for her. That's Katharina von Bora. She was apparently very beautiful. And he found a nobleman who was a Christian who wanted to marry her. And he goes to tell her the good news, and she says, I don't want to marry him. And he's stunned. You got to remember, marriage back then was a little more practically, not just romance and stars in your eyes. He had effected an excellent match for her, and she was turning him down. And he says, well, why? Because she says, I will marry you. And he was stunned. By the way, Luther, he wasn't opposed to getting married. He just did not think he should, because he knew there's this great big target on him. You got to remember, Luther literally lived every day thinking that he's going to be arrested and executed. Even at this point, there were, an army could sweep through and grab him. He really did not expect to die a natural death, which he actually does. So he was hesitant to marry. but she convinced him. And it was a very good marriage. They had 7 children. One, I think, died in infancy. One of the girls, a real tragic story, she died as a teenager. He is holding her as she died. I forget illness that she contracted or something. But and then they adopted 10 more. Now, these were actually like nephews, nieces and nephews. But imagine 16 kids, all right? And Frederick the Wise was so concerned for him, all these kids, he gave him one of the monastery convent that had been abandoned. He just gave it to him. He had a lot of rooms, and Luther and Luther was always having guests. His poor wife, at Praise Jam, some of the other things we might have. In fact, we had like 41 one night. But I understand preparing food. But it's once a week. All right. They had to do it every day. He would have large numbers of guests. Remember, he's still teaching, and he would invite college students over. And it was seldom that there wasn't at least 25 people around the table. And then people would just show up at his door from all over Europe. That they got in trouble because they become a Protestant. They're in a Catholic country. So I'm going to flee, go to Wittenberg and meet Luther. And they just knock on his door, and he would let them in. It's amazing he, wasn't knocked off by somebody, who was pretending to need help and was actually sent there to get him. But I guess he had the Lord's protection. That never did happen. But he had just all kinds of people. Refugees would show up at his door. He'd take them in. And then he would have his famous table talks. Some of these were conversations that some of his students, they wrote down what occurred. And that's a little book that's available, very interesting little book, Table Talks. And basically bull sessions is what I call them. You just, they'd have this big meal. They would just sit back and they would talk theology. They'd talk what's going on. They would just all sorts of things like that. And then Luther might jump up and start chasing the kids and playing and, falling down the floor and wrestling with them. He was an excellent parent figure. So that's, things going on. And all in the midst of this too, not only is writing all these pamphlets and these books, he's writing hymns, And of course the most famous, always mentioned, is "The Mighty Fortress Is Our God." And it is suspected he took popular tunes and would write lyrics for them that were Christian lyrics. Some of which were claimed to have been beer hall tunes. In fact, some claim that for "A Mighty Fortress." I'm not sure that's true or not, but that claim is made. All right, and now I'm going to run through this very, very quickly. I mentioned last time I was going to skip over it, but I think we need to see the good, the bad, and the ugly because this may come up with you in conversations with folks. Luther and his views on Judaism and Jews. Let me say first off, his problem later develops with Jews was not racial, which the Nazis would always claim, and that's just totally not true. His view was theological. His problem with the Jews later on was pretty much the same as his views toward the Pope. You notice he didn't say nice things about the Pope either. He's the Antichrist, and things like this, But initially, his attitude was actually positive towards the Jews. In fact, the bulk of his career it was. Had Luther died 3 years before he died, there'd be nothing negative about him and the Jews. It all developed in the last 3 years of his life, which, not making excuses, but I'm just simply saying he was old, he was very ill, he had constant problems with kidney stones. I have been told that kidney stone pain is one pain that would make you want to have childbirth, and ladies, how extreme that is, right? All right, but anyway, he was not at his best, needless to say, when he changed his attitude. But starting off, it sounded pretty good. Therefore, I will cite from Scripture the reasons that move me to believe that Christ was a Jew born of a virgin, that I might perhaps also win some Jews to the Christian faith. Our fools, the popes, bishops, sophists, monks, the crude, you see his words there, heads have hitherto also treated the Jews that anyone who wished to be a good Christian would almost have to become a Jew. In other words, at this point, he's in sympathy with the Jews. If I'd been a Jew and seen such dolts and blockheads govern and teach the Christian faith, I would sooner have become a hog than a Christian. They have dealt with Jews as if they were dogs rather than human beings. They have done little else than deride them and seize their property. When they baptize them, they show them nothing of Christian doctrine or life, but only subject them to popishness and monkery. When the Jews then see that Judaism has such strong support in Scripture and that Christianity has become a mere bauble without reliance on Scripture, how can they possibly compose themselves and become good, right Christians? I have myself heard from pious baptized Jews that if they had not in our day heard the gospel, they would have remained Jews under the cloak of Christianity for the rest of their days. For they acknowledge that they have never yet heard anything about Christ from those who baptized and taught them. This is, the Catholics doing this. I hope that if anyone deals in a kindly way with the Jews and instructs them carefully from Holy Scripture, many of them will become genuine Christians and turn again to the faith of their fathers, the prophets and patriarchs. They will only be frightened further away from it if their Judaism is so utterly rejected that nothing is allowed to remain. They are treated only with arrogance and scorn. If the apostles, who were also Jews, had dealt with us Gentiles as we Gentiles deal with the Jews, there would never have been a Christian among the Gentiles. Now this all sounds like, this doesn't sound like he's very anti-Semitic here, because at this point in his life he wasn't. Okay, simply this. Well, all right, since they dealt with us Gentiles in such brotherly fashion, we in our own ought to treat the Jews in a brotherly manner in order that we might convert some of them. For even we ourselves are not yet all very far along, not to speak of having arrived. 16 years go by and few Jews convert. I'll say this, 16 years go by, Luther at this early stage thought that the reason the Jews had not converted was simply because of Catholicism. That Catholicism was off the track, off the beam, and they had mistreated the Jews, and that's why Jews hadn't converted to Christianity. Okay, and that's pretty much his view. Year goes by. He's thinking with Lutheranism, they're going to mass convert to Lutheranism, right? Another year goes by, 16 years go by, very few Jews convert. In fact, there's actually a few cases where you have Gentiles converting to Judaism, and he gets word of this, which really concerns him. And then this guy, 1530, a Jew, Anton Margaretha, which had very profound influence on Luther. He converted from Judaism and Christianity in 1522, and afterwards he became a Lutheran. He was an expert in Hebrew, and in fact taught at different Christian universities, taught Hebrew. And he becomes virulently anti-Jewish, though he himself was, formerly a Jew. And he wrote a book that actually got him in trouble with the Catholic authorities because it was too anti-Jewish. Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, same one that went after Luther, actually, had him expelled from Augsburg because the Jewish community were complaining about him giving them so much trouble. Now the book, what a title. The book, The Whole Jewish Faith, together with a thorough and truthful account of all the regulations, ceremonies, prayers, both for the family public worship, as observed by the Jews throughout the year, with excellent, well-founded arguments against their faith. All right, I like that for a title. And this book was virulently anti-Semitic. And Luther read it. And, I'm sure Luther was flattered that this guy was a former Jew who converted to Lutheranism, which in his view, too few had done. And he was convinced that all the stuff in this book was true, which it wasn't. Okay? And one of the things that particularly upset him was his Alanu prayer, which, frankly is kind of anti-Christian. In that prayer, basically, he well, they say some things that is not nice towards Christians, all right? And so this riles him up. And at this point, Luther becomes well, here's the actual statement. For the apostates, let there be no hope, and let the arrogant government be speedily uprooted in our days. Let the Nazarene, meaning the followers of Yeshua, or as Christians, and the men be destroyed in a moment, and let them be blotted out of the book of life, and not inscribed together with the righteous. Blessed art thou, Lord, who humblest the arrogant. Well, that really sets Luther off, okay? And so he then is going to write, just 3 years before he dies, this little pamphlet, which is going to cause all the trouble. And really, had he never written this pamphlet, Luther would have a much, much better reputation. Let me just simply say this. Tiny little pamphlet on the Jews and their lies, written in 1543. He dies 1546, you see. And in that pamphlet, he's calling for the conversion of the Jews by coercion, which he had earlier been opposed to. He puts things, Hitler would quote heavily from this pamphlet. He takes it out of context, by the way. He implies that Luther is against the Jews because of their race. Hitler is against the Jews because of their theology. With Luther, it's not racial, it's theological, okay? But it's still bad, because he's using coercion. But he's not an anti-Semite in the racist sense. His arguments against the Jews are theological, not biological. All right, what shall we Christians do with this rejected, condemned people, the Jews? Since they live among us, we dare not tolerate their conduct now that we're aware they're lying and reviling and blaspheming. See, all this comes from this book he read. Okay, if we do, we become sharers in their lies, cursing, and blasphemy. And first, he said, set fire to their synagogues, And I'm going to just run through this. And then he uses Old Testament just 5 ways saying there. And then he says, second, advise their houses be razed and destroyed. Says let them live in barns, okay? And then I advise that all their prayer books, Talmudic writings, in which adultery, lies, cursing, blasphemy are taught, be taken from them. The Talmud, not the Bible, the Talmud, And then he says, I advise that the rabbis be forbidden to teach on the pain and loss of life and limb. For they justly forfeit the right to such an office by holding the poor Jews captive to the sayings of Moses. Okay? And and then fifth, I advise that safe conduct on the highways be abolished completely for the Jews, for they have no business in the countryside, since they are not lords, officials, tradesmen, or the like. Let them stay at home. And then I advise that usury be prohibited to them. The Jews famously could loan money. That's how many of them made their living. And he's saying, take that away from them. And he wants them to earn a living by, hard manual labor, basically. Okay? And then, but, which you never hear Hitler say this, says the money that, you take from them, to use it, that whenever a Jew severely converts, he could be handed 100, 200, 300 florins in order to get their own start. Okay? And then I recommend putting a fell or an axe hoe, and there's where he's talking about they should, earn their work by hard labor, just like German farmers do. So and then his worst comment just before he died, we were at fault for not slaying them. Okay, so with that said, Luther has a real black eye when it comes to Judaism, and I think you need to be aware of this, okay, the good and the bad. He, right before he dies, there's a dispute between two Christian, nobility, and so he leaves Wittenberg, go try to resolve this dispute, and there he dies, February 1546, and he's buried right there, the church there in Wittenberg Castle. All right, so that's Martin Luther, the good and the bad. And let's go now. Can we switch over to Zwingli? Those PowerPoints. All right. How much time we got? We got time for an introduction, basically. All right. We got to switch over to Switzerland now. And you got another man that's contemporaneous with Luther. I'd say he's like 2-3 years kind of staggered behind Luther in terms of his development. And his background has some similarities with Luther. For example, Luther's dad was a peasant who made well, mining, copper. Zwingli's dad was a peasant who did well, became the mayor of the little town in which Zwingli was living. Zwingli had several church connections. I think he had an uncle who was already a priest. His father, since he was doing fairly well, sends him to different schools. In fact, he winds up at the University of Basel. This is Switzerland at the time, which you can see was quite a patchwork itself. I don't know if I can get my pointer to work here. You see up at the top there, though, you got Zurich. Then way over here, sticking out as a point over there is where Geneva is. So that's where John Calvin's later going to be. Zurich is up there in the northern part of Switzerland. Just across the border is Germany. All right? Different area there. You got Ulrich Zwingli. He went to the University of Basel. He's very much, and when I say humanistically, I'm talking Christian humanism now, which is a whole different story from what we call humanism today. He was very heavily influenced by the Renaissance and particularly by Erasmus. Remember, Erasmus had a huge, profound effect upon Luther as well. And Erasmus came out with the Greek translation of the New Testament, and which, by the way, Zwingli memorized word for word the entire Greek New Testament. All right. Brother Clyde, be proud if you're here today. He built a personal library. The difference is, whereas Luther stays in academia, he's teaching in Wittenberg when the whole thing blew up with him, Zwingli becomes a pastor. And now, let me say all this education and this interest in the Bible is later. When he first starts out as a priest, he freely confesses that he knew very little theology. And most priests, that was a common thing. They really weren't that much into theology. This is something that he develops on his own, and he begins to intensely begin studying the New Testament. And therefore, there is this big debate that rages among scholars today as to, did Zwingli come up with his ideas independent of Luther, or did he just basically steal his ideas from Luther? And there's different people out there that argue this. I personally, from looking, and I have to say mine's rather surface looking, it appears to me that Zwingli independently comes to many of the exact same conclusions that Luther did. And I don't know why this is such a shock. They read the same Bible, okay? And so it's really, if you read it, you should have the same opinions, on most of these areas. And it is true that Zwingli would later read a lot of Luther, but I think he was searching out for self-confirmation of what he had already come around to believe as well, Of course, we all know they're big. Yes, sir.
Would they have both read Hus?
Huh?
Would they both have read from Hus?
I don't know. Honestly, I can't answer that. I suspect the answer would be yes, but I don't know.
I think that would probably...
Well, the writings of Hus and Wycliffe are out there. And he had 300 books in his personal library early on as a young man. That doesn't sound like much today, but 300 books, and he actually read all 300 of them. And so he knew all about the church fathers like Luther did. He did extensive study, and he's very profoundly influenced by this. But anyway, he graduated from the University of Basel with a master's and doctor's degree. He becomes a priest in 1506. But at this point in stage in his life, he hasn't done all the study yet. He's a priest, he's operating. He is going to, thereafter though, after 1506, that's when it begins. And several things that's going to bring him around to this 1518 where he's right with Luther. Independently, he's opposed to sell indulgence. In fact, he personally stopped a guy coming into his area of Switzerland that was trying to sell indulgences, but he actually got the backing of the local bishop, so he didn't get in trouble like Luther did. Now, this is something that apparently really profoundly affected him. What's Switzerland famous for today, folks? Swiss chocolates, Swiss cheese. Used to be watches, right? Back then it was soldiers. It was mercenaries. Yeah. They would hire themselves out to go fight in other people's wars. You know, Switzerland's rather impoverished, and so, you know, that was a way to make a buck. And the Swiss had a notorious reputation. In fact, I've heard it said that up until just a few years ago in northern Italy, mothers, to make their children behave, say, "The Swiss are coming." Okay? They had a terrible reputation, particularly in Italy, because that's where they were often involved in wars there in Italy. He, of course, is going to be given position as a chaplain to one of these armies, and the wars are going. And the wars are all between the King of France and the Pope. You know, fighting over territory there in Italy. And in one of these wars, Battle of Marignano, he was on the losing side. 10,000 Swiss soldiers are captured. And I forget who the guy was in charge at the time. I believe it was one of the French kings. He did not want to feed 10,000 prisoners. So he ordered they all be executed. And it was Zwingli's job. Now, can you imagine the guilt that this must have put on him? Since he is a priest, they're not going to kill him. He's a chaplain. And since he's the chaplain to these 10,000 soldiers that are about to be killed, he had to give each soldier the last rites. Can you imagine doing that? Give them the last rites, knowing that these people are going to be executed because the guy who captured them doesn't want to feed them. What's that for a justification of killing 10,000 people? All right, soldiers. This utterly turned him against this whole Swiss system of farming out their young men to go fight in other people's wars. And by the way, one of the lasting influences of Zwingli upon Switzerland is that Switzerland, shortly thereafter, becomes a neutral country. When's the last time you heard Switzerland fight in a war? Now, by the way, he's not a pacifist. His fact was a very, very firm Swiss nationalist. His idea was arm ourselves to the teeth so we don't have to fight. If you know anything about Switzerland, that's what they've done. You know, even Hitler decides to leave Switzerland alone. You know, they have got literally cities carved into those mountains. If nuclear warfare ever comes, Switzerland's the best place to be. And, you know, they have entire cities carved underground there, you know, in the mountains of Switzerland. So, but anyway, that is really going to, and what also revolts him is his realization that the Pope is all involved in this warfare and this killing and this mayhem. And that really causes him to question the Pope. But in spite of that, he goes back and he winds up with a position as sort of the people's priest in Zurich, 1522. This is Grossmünster Church where he would preach at. And he is going to be a very, very popular priest. And one reason is the way he preached. He decides, remember he memorized the Greek New Testament, he decides instead of following this formula that the Catholic Church where you have a specific passage set up for a specific Sunday, and everybody all across Europe is supposed to be using the same passage, he decides to get the book of Matthew and read it verse by verse and exposit it. And that was a radical notion at that day. And people just loved it. Huge crowds come to hear him. You know, it's amazing. Expository preaching has set off many a revival. You know, just read the word of God to the people, and then, you know, with explanations. And so, and then after he finishes that, he goes into the Acts of the Apostles. And then he goes through the whole New Testament, and then he starts on the Old Testament, you know. And he would preach thousands of expository sermons. Now, so now he's against mercenary warfare. He's also opposed to indulgences. He's already established that. In 1519, personal experience, he fell in love. And of course, he's a priest. You're not supposed to fall in love. And, had an affair. And this begins to make him start thinking that clerical marriage, or forbidding a clerical marriage, was wrong. Okay? And he, of course, was already criticizing the Pope's wars in Italy, and he starts arguing that priests should be allowed to marry. Now, in 1519, remember 1519, Luther, keep your time period here, he's standing before the Holy Roman Emperor, and he's I will not recant, and all this is going on. You got Cortez is landing in Mexico to conquer the Aztec Indians at this time. In Zurich, he is doing this expository preaching. You get down 1522, a bunch of stuff happens, 1522. In 1522, he secretly marries. Now, I say secretly, everybody in Zurich knew about it. And they apparently were okay with it. He'd already been preaching, preparing, and he married a widow lady, and would have children by her. And in 1524, he goes public. All right, which is flat out defying the church. And also back in 1522, he's going to break the Lenten fast. I'll tell you a little more about that in a second. And he also preaches the authority of Scripture alone, and he's doing this verse by verse expository preaching. Now, about, you want to talk about, you are laughing, but remember American Revolution, you won't get to a precipitating event, what we all think about? Boston Tea Party. There's so much more to that Tea Party than what you usually get in school, though. That goes to events around the other side of the planet in India. London, East India Company going bankrupt, and members of Parliament to hold stock in that company, and so they decide it's amazing how politicians, they don't care about spending your money, but boy, if their money's in danger, they suddenly get real interested, Well, so you got the American Revolution partially being kicked off over a fight over tea. The Protestant Reformation in Switzerland gets the precipitating incident with sausage. Although that does sound kind of German, doesn't it? Okay, in March 1522, Zwingli is invited to take part in eating sausage. The problem is, it's Lent. And what does that mean? No meat. Always interesting how fish is no meat. No, in South America, they got this semi-aquatic animal, and this huge thing, and they have it classified as being fish. It's always amazing how you get these special, exceptions to things. But so Zwingli goes over there, and the guy putting on the feast that night, he's actually feeding his workers plus some invited guests, and actually there's some priests there too. And he's this I can't even pronounce his name. You can speak German in here. Froschauer, I think, something like that. Huh? Froschauer. Okay, Froschauer was a printer. And in fact, he prints the Zwingli version of the Bible. Zwingli also translates the Bible into German in Zurich. Although we're not sure how much of the translation was just by Zwingli. We think several people were involved in it. But Froschauer was the guy who was printing it. And Froschauer apparently read what he was printing, and he had really become very radically Protestant. And he particularly did not like this teaching on no meat during Lent. And so Zwingli goes over there. He himself does not eat the sausage because he knows this could really touch off something. But it touches off far more than he expected. Just like Luther printed the 95 Theses, never imagined what a storm it's going to set off. Well, eating these little sausages sets off a huge storm. In fact, Froschauer, this becomes public knowledge, and Froschauer is going to be arrested and put in jail for having eaten sausage during Lent. Okay, Zwingli himself did not eat the sausages, but a few Sundays later in a sermon, after everything goes crazy and The bishop gets involved and a whole bunch of people, public outcry against this. He gives a sermon, and he entitles the sermon, Regarding the Choice and Freedom of Foods, is the title of the sermon. And Zwingli argued in this sermon that fasting should be entirely voluntary, not mandatory. He was advancing the Reformation position that Lent was subject to individual conscience rather than man-made rules of the Catholic Church. And I'm sure this is probably one of the verses he had in mind here. Who can loudly, well, I guess I better do it since I got the mic. If with Christ you died to the elemental, somebody has a mic out there? Okay. If with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that all perish as they are used, according to human precepts and teachings. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. That's Colossians 2:21 through 23. Okay, so you see, he definitely has biblical foundations for arguing this. And this is going to lead to his full break with the Catholic Church over sausage, which is kind of funny when you think of that, okay? All right, so Zwingli's got his Luther's got his 95 Theses. Zwingli has his 67 articles. And don't have, just like I didn't have time to go through the entire 95 Theses, don't have time to go through the 67 articles, so I'm just going to sum up to you basically. He says the sacraments are channels of grace. They're not what saves you, though. Baptism was being accepted into the Christian community, and that's going to be a real touchy issue with Zwingli, baptism, because Zwingli's going to get into huge arguments. Some of his own followers, very close friends of his, young men, who are much more zealous, however, and they're going to break with him over this issue of baptism. And that, folks, is going to lead to the creation of a movement called Anabaptism. Comes out of this, which we're going to see reaches right to this very congregation, all right, down the road. He denied, of course, the importance of the Pope, the importance of the Mass. He'll later develop his own liturgy or service, replacing the Mass. He believed priests should be allowed to marry. He really nails that one. Opposed the cell indulgences, objected to penance and purgatory, and he did not have a very high view of priests and clergy. All this is echoing who we've already studied. Pretty much verbatim Luther. Okay. Now, in 1529, Philip of Hesse, who's a very powerful German prince, who's trying to unify all Protestants everywhere because he knows Catholic forces are arranged against them. He was very impressed with Luther. He's very impressed with Zwingli. He thinks the two guys need to get together, literally, and hammer things out because, Protestants, he feels, should unify, should unite. And so he is going to set up a meeting called the Marburg I never can say this, colloquy. It's really a conference, right? And you have Luther and Zwingli meet, along with other major Protestant theologians. They gather together. And they actually managed to hammer out 15 issues they're discussing, major points of doctrine. And of the 15, 14 of them they come to a complete agreement on. But they couldn't agree on the Lord's Supper. And Luther was actually beginning to kind of like Zwingli, and Zwingli is beginning to, of course, Zwingli had always had a high opinion of Luther. But when they get to this point, Luther kind of loses it. He really gets angry at Zwingli. And of course, Luther could not completely abandon transubstantiation. He does abandon that, but he has something just very similar to it, consubstantiation, right? Where there's real presence of Jesus in the blood, the wine and the bread. Zwingli, if I can just, and Jeff later may be able to explain this on around the 21st. I won't be able to be here, and he's going to go into explanation of the differences Protestant doctrine on on the Lord's Supper and perhaps if he has times on baptism as well, which I think he's going to do a great job for you on. But basically, for Zwingli, it was a memorial. In fact, he had a very Baptist view of it. It was a memorial. It's done because Christ asked for us to do it in remembrance of him. And with Zwingli, and you know, this may sound kind of gross, but you stop and think about it, I think he's totally right. He says, for to say that this is a miracle, which is what the Catholics say is absurd. To say that you're eating the flesh of Jesus literally and you're drinking his blood, to him that was gross, because what happens when you eat something, consume something, it goes into bowels and it's excreted, you know. And to him that's just gross, you know. And he said this is a memorial to Christ. It's not, you know, literal blood and wine. I mean blood and bread, body. Okay, so they could not agree on that. You know, and Luther, you know, left with, and so now the sad part of this is they came so close, and this could have unified Protestantism, which would put them in a better situation to oppose what's going to become literally a war that the Catholics are going to initiate upon them, and they could have fought from a unified position, and that will not happen because of this. So, oh my gosh. Oh, we've got 5-minute warning?
No, I was going to.
Yeah.
Luther got so mad that he flipped the table over and pulled out a knife and started writing. I forgot what he started writing on it.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a quote in German, but he says, you know, this is my body, this is my blood. He's saying that in German over and over again. This is my body, this is my blood. And yeah, and he was, Luther had a temper, most definitely. Okay, so it flares up there. So it wasn't quite, you see they're over there discussing there in the corner there. But for most of it, they got along great. It's just when they got to that, I mean, and of course when they parted, you know, same person in the room, you know, you can hammer stuff out, but people go away and then other people start talking and other people say, he said, and it just got worse and worse and worse. So it was very, very unfortunate. Okay, so the problem with Zwingli is that he really, I think, got too much into politics. He was, of course, a reformer, but he's also a Swiss nationalist, and he was trying to unify Switzerland, not just religiously, but politically as well. And I think his involvement in politics distracted and took him away from the religious part of it too. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's so rejected, you know, some of the younger guys who are heading towards Anabaptism, because he was so tied up with doing it through the government and having the government backing in everything he did. Initially, he was successful in politics. 1529, he organized an army against the Catholic cantons. You got to remember, not all Switzerland was Protestant. You had cantons that went reformed, like pretty much following the teachings of Zwingli. You had other cantons that remained Catholic, and they were trying to bring in outside Catholic forces to help them. And so Zwingli, at one point, organizes all these Protestant cantons, and you know they're going to go to war with the Catholic cantons. And initially, the first time around, Zwingli did a great job. They had overwhelming numbers. I think he had an army something like 30,000. Catholics had something like 6,000. And had they had a battle, that probably would have settled the issue right there. However, others stepped in and says, let's not actually fight. You know, let's have a settlement. The Catholics were more than willing to do that, seeing how they were totally outnumbered. And you have they call it the Peace of Capelle. And the Peace of Capelle really ruined everything for Zwingli, in that he never was able to get everyone back together again. They had this opportunity to really put the Catholics down. They let that slip away. And after that, the Protestant cantons start fussing and squabbling with each other. The Catholics, noticing this, they organize a sneak surprise attack on Zurich at a time which Zurich was having all kinds of internal dissension, which was another reason they did it at this time. I think they're able to organize maybe 3,000 men, where previously they had a united army of all the cantons of 30,000. go out to fight the Catholics, who still have about 6,000, but they're outnumbered 2-1. And in the battle, 500 of the Zurich supporters are killed. Amongst them are a bunch of the pastors who are out there as chaplains, including Zwingli as a chaplain. And Zwingli is going to be killed in the Second Battle of Kapelle, 1531. That's woodcut. And what happened? Okay, it's back there, but it's not. I just want to show them the picture of Zwingli being killed. That's the picture of Zwingli. So that's going to end Zwingli, but it does not end the Protestant movement in Switzerland at all. And I'll probably recap this next time with you, but let me just say, this guy is going to pick up the reins. He's totally non-controversial in terms of using violence, in terms of getting involved in politics. He's kind of the MacArthur of his day. He is going to preach over 75,000 sermons and expository. He's preached through the entire Bible more than once. And these expository sermons is going to become the basis of his commentaries, which at the time is probably one of the most famous sets of commentaries that all reformers are going to use. I'm sure even Calvin himself used his commentaries. And we'll talk briefly about him and then start on the Anabaptists next time.